On one cold Halloween night, a small town was filled with the usual festive atmosphere. Children were dressed in spooky costumes, the streets were adorned with glowing pumpkins, and houses were draped in cobwebs and fake crows. But at the end of the street stood an abandoned house that everyone avoided. The house was the source of many terrifying stories and rumors. Legend had it that an old woman once lived there alone, surrounded by a large collection of dolls. But these were no ordinary dolls. The woman believed that each doll contained the soul of a child who had died under mysterious circumstances. One night, the house burned down under strange circumstances, and her body was never found. Since then, the house had been cursed. That night, a group of 5 teenagers decided to test their courage by entering the house. They called it the Ghost Challenge, an idea that seemed thrilling at first, but always ended in unforgettable fear. The leader of the group was the most enthusiastic. Together with the other 4, they carried flashlights and an old camera and made their way to the abandoned house. As they stepped inside, an eerie chill enveloped them. The air felt thick, as if they had stepped into another world. Dust covered everything, and the walls were layered with mold. But what caught their attention most were the dolls. Hundreds of them were scattered in every corner. Some were missing eyes, while others stared directly at the intruders as if welcoming them. One of them whispered nervously, "I don't like this place." The dolls, they feel alive. With exaggerated confidence, the leader replied, "Don't be scared. These are just old stories. Let's check out the second floor." As they climbed the creaky staircase, strange noises began to echo. Incomprehensible whispers, as if someone was speaking in the nearby rooms. Then they heard footsteps behind them. They froze and turned around, but there was no one there. The person at the back of the group stammered, "Did you hear that?" The leader tried to remain brave. "It's just the wind. This is an old house." But the wind doesn't whisper people's names. One of the girls clearly heard a voice saying, "Why are you here?" She screamed, but the others tried to calm her down. They reached a room at the end of the hallway. It was completely dark, except for a sliver of moonlight seeping through a broken window. The room was filled with dolls. Some were broken, while others were eerily pristine. In the center of the room sat a doll almost the size of a child, perched on a rocking chair. Its glassy eyes gleamed in an unsettling way. One of them muttered, "That doll. Its eyes are moving." A girl cautiously approached. "It's just a trick of the light. Let me take a picture." But before she could press the shutter button, they all heard a clear voice, "Don't take my picture." Everyone froze. Was that real? Or a shared hallucination? They decided to leave, but the leader insisted on staying back to take one last photo. "I'll prove to everyone that this is just a myth," he said confidently. As the others descended the stairs, they heard him scream. They rushed back to the room, but he was gone. The camera lay on the floor, and the doll that had been on the rocking chair was nowhere to be seen. When they fled the house and handed the camera to the police, the last photo it captured showed the leader. But he wasn't alone in the picture. Behind him stood the pale face of a woman, her eyes completely black, and a sinister smile stretched across her face. The police never found him, and the house was demolished a year after the incident. Yet, locals claimed that every Halloween night, whispers could be heard coming from where the house once stood, and dolls mysteriously appeared on doorsteps throughout the neighborhood. So, what do you think? Would you dare to enter an abandoned house on Halloween night? Perhaps the story is just a legend, or maybe something awaits those who challenge the unknown. On a quiet Halloween night, a group of friends gathered in a small town to take part in an old tradition known as the ghost hunt. The challenge was simple: visit a location rumored to be haunted and spend the night there. This year, they chose an abandoned mental hospital on the outskirts of town, a place infamous for its dark history. Decades ago, the facility was abruptly shut down after a series of unexplained events, and it was said that the screams of its former patients could still be heard echoing through the halls on dark nights. As they approached the building, the air seemed to grow heavier. The windows were shattered, the doors hung loosely on their hinges, and the wind howled through the crumbling walls. Rumors of cruel experiments and restless spirits only added to the eerie atmosphere. Despite their growing unease, the friends pushed forward, armed with flashlights and a camera to document their adventure. Inside, the silence was deafening, but not comforting. It felt as though they were being watched. The walls were covered in strange drawings and faded words scrawled in what looked like dried blood. Messages like, "Help me" and "Run" were etched in trembling handwriting. One of them tried to lighten the mood with a joke, but their laughter quickly died out when they heard heavy footsteps coming from the floor above. Cautiously, they climbed the creaking staircase, which groaned under their weight. At the top, they found an abandoned operating room. Rusty surgical tools were scattered about, and some still bore stains of what could only be old blood. Suddenly, their flashlights flickered and went out simultaneously, plunging them into darkness. In the silence, whispers began to emerge, soft at first but growing louder. The voices were unintelligible, but they carried an undeniable anger. One friend, who had been filming with the camera, suddenly screamed and collapsed to the floor. When they managed to revive him with their phone lights, he was shaking uncontrollably, claiming that something had grabbed him and ordered him to leave. Then, they noticed something even more chilling. A door that had been firmly shut was now wide open, as if inviting them in. They hesitated, but eventually entered the room. Inside, they found a single bed in the center surrounded by chairs, as though for a therapy session. What made their blood run cold were the photos on the walls. They hadn't been there before. The pictures showed distorted images of their own faces, bruised and bloodied. Before they could react, the door slammed shut behind them with a force that shook the room. A deep, guttural voice echoed, "You will never leave." Panic set in as they began running in all directions, searching desperately for an exit. The hallways seemed endless, twisting and shifting as if the building itself were alive. One friend vanished into the darkness, their screams abruptly silenced. The others finally managed to break a window and escape, tumbling out into the cold night. The next morning, police officers returned to investigate. Inside the room, they found a camera lying on the floor. When they reviewed the footage, the last image chilled them to the core. It was a photo of the group in the room, but there was someone else with them. Standing behind them was a pale figure with hollow eyes and a sinister grin. The missing friend was never found, and it's said that their spirit now roams the hospital, forever trapped in its cursed corridors. It was the night of Halloween, and the town of Ravenwood was alive with the sights and sounds of the season. Children in elaborate costumes darted from house to house, their laughter echoing through the chilly air. The streets were lined with jack-o'-lanterns, their flickering faces casting eerie shadows. But on the outskirts of the town, beyond the fields and woods, there stood an old mansion that no one dared to approach, the Blackthorn Estate. The estate had been abandoned for decades, left to decay in silence. The townsfolk whispered tales of its dark past. A family of 5 who vanished without a trace one Halloween night, leaving behind a blood-stained dining room and a dinner table set for a feast that no one ever touched. Since then, strange lights were often seen in its windows, and the occasional scream would pierce the night air, chilling the spines of those who lived closest. This Halloween, a group of college students decided to test their courage. It was a tradition for thrill-seekers to attempt entering the Blackthorn Estate, but none had ever stayed longer than a few minutes. Jake, the ringleader of the group, was determined to break the record. His friends Sarah, Mark, Lisa, and Eric reluctantly agreed to join him, armed with flashlights, a video camera, and a bundle of nerves. The 5 of them stood at the rusted iron gate, staring up at the dark silhouette of the mansion. The moonlight barely illuminated its crumbling facade, and the broken windows looked like hollow eyes staring back at them. Jake pushed the gate open, the screeching sound echoing through the night. "You guys ready?" he asked, trying to sound confident. "This is a bad idea," Lisa muttered, clutching her flashlight tightly. "Come on, Lisa. It's just an old house, Jake said with a grin. Besides, think of the views we'll get when we upload this. The group made their way up the overgrown path, the crunch of leaves underfoot the only sound. The air grew colder the closer they got, as if the house itself exuded a chill. When they reached the front door, they found it slightly ajar. Jake pushed it open, and the hinges groaned in protest. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of mildew and decay. The grand foyer was dimly lit by the moonlight streaming through the cracked windows. A massive staircase dominated the room, its banister adorned with cobwebs. To their left was a parlor filled with tattered furniture, and to their right, a dining room with a long table still set for dinner. The plates were covered in a thick layer of dust, but the silverware gleamed as if freshly polished. "This place is giving me the creeps," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Relax," Jake replied, pulling out the camera. "Let's split up and get some footage. We'll cover more ground that way." "Are you insane?" Mark asked. "That's how people die in horror movies." "We'll stay in pairs," Jake said. "Sarah, you're with me. Mark, you go with Lisa. Eric, you check out the kitchen. We'll meet back here in 10 minutes. Despite their protests, the group reluctantly agreed. Eric headed toward the kitchen, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The room was filled with rusted appliances and broken cabinets. A faint dripping sound came from the sink, even though the plumbing hadn't worked in decades. He approached the sink and froze when he saw the source of the dripping, a trail of blood leading to the drain. Meanwhile, Jake and Sarah explored the upstairs bedrooms. Most were empty, but one room caught their attention. It was a child's bedroom, eerily preserved. Toys were scattered across the floor, and a small bed was neatly made. On the nightstand was a music box. Jake couldn't resist winding it up. As the haunting melody played, Sarah swore she heard faint laughter. She turned to Jake, but his expression had changed. He was staring at the mirror on the opposite wall. "Jake," she asked, her voice trembling. He pointed to the mirror. "Do you see that?" In the reflection, a shadowy figure stood behind them, its face obscured, but its eyes glowing red. Sarah screamed, and the figure vanished when they turned around. In the dining room, Mark and Lisa were examining the table. Mark noticed a note under one of the plates. It was written in shaky handwriting. "They're still here." As he read it aloud, the chandelier above them began to sway. Lisa grabbed his arm, her flashlight trembling. Suddenly, all the candles on the table lit up simultaneously, casting flickering shadows that seemed to move independently of the light source. "We need to get out of here," Lisa said, pulling Mark toward the foyer. The group reconvened, each of them pale and shaken. Jake's camera captured their panicked faces as they recounted what they had seen. Just as they were about to leave, the front door slammed shut on its own, and a deep, guttural laugh echoed through the house. "Run!" Jake yelled, and they bolted for the back door. But the house seemed to shift around them, the hallways stretching and twisting. Doors that were open moments ago were now locked, and the air was filled with whispers and distant screams. Eric was the first to fall. Something grabbed him from the shadows, pulling him into the darkness despite his desperate screams. The others tried to follow his cries, but they led to a dead end. One by one, they were separated. Lisa found herself in the basement, where chains hung from the ceiling and old medical equipment lay scattered. She heard a voice whisper her name, and when she turned, she saw a pair of glowing eyes staring back at her. Mark and Sarah managed to find each other, but their relief was short-lived. A figure stepped out of the shadows, a tall, gaunt man in a tattered suit. His face was pale and hollow, and his smile revealed jagged, yellowed teeth. He raised a hand, and the walls began to bleed. Jake, still clutching the camera, found himself back in the foyer. The front door was open, but as he ran toward it, he felt a cold hand grip his shoulder. He turned to see the shadowy figure from the mirror, now fully formed and towering over him. The last thing he heard was the sound of his own scream. The next morning, the police found the camera outside the mansion gates. The footage revealed glimpses of their terror. The blood, the shadows, the glowing eyes. But none of the friends were ever seen again. Locals say the Blackthorn estate claimed their souls, just as it had claimed the family before them. Every Halloween night, strange lights can still be seen in the windows of the mansion, and those brave enough to approach swear they can hear laughter, screams, and the faint melody of a music box.
Join our family and be part of our adventures. Just click the subscribe button now.